Hello, friends. I'm Kathy Fay, Executive Director of the Boston Early Music Festival, or BEMF, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to this very special pre-concert talk as we look forward to the opening performance of the second half of our 2021-2022 concert season, featuring the extraordinary vocal ensemble Stile Antico on Friday, February 18th at St. Paul Church in Harvard Square, Cambridge, Massachusetts. It is my honor to introduce our four guests, including three members of Stile Antico: soprano Rebecca Hickey, alto Emma Ashby, bass James Arthur, as well as Edward Jones, university organist and choirmaster at the Memorial Church at Harvard University. Welcome, Rebecca, Emma, James, and Ed.
Thank you.
Rebecca, Emma, and James, our upcoming concert marks Stile Antico's 11th performance on the BEMF concert stage since your memorable North American debut at the June 2009 Boston Early Music Festival. We're looking so forward to seeing you in person for this appropriately titled program, Toward the Dawn, evoking hope and renewal. And we're so grateful to all of you for your careful attention to safe and responsible precautions as you travel to and from the UK. Before I turn the microphone over to our moderator, Ed Jones, for those wishing to attend our concert on Friday, February 18th, we are sold out of in-person tickets, meaning only virtual tickets are now available. To secure your virtual ticket, please visit the BEMF website at bemf.org. For only $15 per household, you can enjoy the concert video of Stile Antico's performance from Friday, March 4th through Friday, March 18th. And again, for just $15, every member of your household can enjoy this concert video as many times as you'd like for a 2-week period. So with that, I will now disappear from the screen and turn the discussion over to the four of you. My sincere thanks again.
Well, thanks so much, Kathy, and welcome to all our viewers and listeners out there. It's a great pleasure to be here today with Emma, Rebecca, and James, who are zooming in, now the very familiar background of Zoom from the UK, but we are so delighted that next week you will be with us in person. We are so excited as the BEMF supporters of this wonderful ensemble Stile Antico to have you back in person after this long hiatus from live in-person music making. I imagine the feeling is similar for all of you to actually be back rather than on Zoom boxes trying to fit in with everything in that way, to actually be doing live music making again. So I thought perhaps we do need to address what you've been doing for the last 2 years, how you've been keeping busy, and what it's been like for all of you as musicians and also just as people.
Yeah, well, we have been keeping busy. We sort of, as soon as we were allowed to within the rules, we got back together in person, obviously distanced, which was quite difficult. But when you were talking just now, I just remembered back to those early days. Do you remember, guys, when we were in our own rooms, like with headphones on, recording one line of a piece of prolific, it was not very satisfying, put it that way. And I think we had some exciting projects, but it was very difficult in those early days.
Yeah, and our colleague Ben Hymas had to learn very fast the art of editing, because one of the things we did quite early on was to put together a performance of Tallis Feminanium with all of us taking a few parts each and piecing it together. And he did an incredible job. And I think it was quite a sharp learning curve for him. But, he's become very, very good at editing videos now.
Mm.
Well, yes, and we're actually very grateful to all the promoters who asked us to make online content in replacement for the concerts that we would have been doing. Of course, one of those was for BEMF last year, so we're enormously grateful to Kathy and all the friends who allowed us to film something in London and then send it over to you. There was another festival in Sackville, Canada, who asked for the same. And a promoter in Colombia as well. So we've got quite savvy at making filmed content We also took part in a festival which included all sorts of different UK-based groups. So yes, we have been grateful to have been able to do some work, even though we've been in lockdown.
Yeah, we've had to be quite creative with how we stand, because normally we stand in a semicircle quite close together, so as to be able to listen to each other. But in order to observe distancing of 2 meters or so, we came up with a double horseshoe arrangement, which meant that we could still be close enough together to hear each other, but also spaced out. But it's been such a relief recently to be able to get back to our usual semicircle, but it's so much easier to perform together when you can, hear each other properly.
I would encourage all our viewers today to watch the Speminalia, which is wonderful how a 12-person choir can magically transform into 40 voices. And as you were saying, all of you, that music is such an iterative process between, not only between an audience or a congregation and a choir performing, but also within the choir. And it really obviously is a very different experience when you're recording your own parts into a microphone with headphones on. Are there any positives, and I realize I probably shouldn't have used that word in coronavirus time, are there any things that you can take away that have been beneficial from having gone through this experience, both in terms of your approach to music making and the way the kind of group interacts with each other now that you're back? Or is it just great to be back in usual formation?
I think you definitely end up being more grateful for what you've got than you might otherwise be. I'm not sure there's any positives to take away from sitting in a room on your own, recording your own part, except that possibly you examine your own technique a little more than you might otherwise.
Yes. I think the other thing is that we always talk about, having each of us having a sense of the tactus of the piece. And in a way, when you're doing it on your own, you absolutely have to stick to the rhythm and not, to do your own thing at all. So I suppose I learned quite a lot from that, thinking, gosh, there are times when I rush ahead or I drag behind. So it was quite good discipline, having to sing along to a track and to be exactly in time. So that's probably what has been quite helpful.
Yeah, as Becky mentioned, we've tried different formations, one of which was a double horseshoe, so that in some instances we would sing into the back of someone else's head at a 2 meter distance, and a certain amount of retraining and attuning of the ears to try and communicate what we normally do by very close eye contact. In our normal formation in the old days, you could feel the person next to you taking their breath, and that helped you to keep the tactus going. But we've had to learn a distanced way of singing that I suspect we're not going to want to stick with, but it certainly has tightened up and heightened our senses somewhat in the way we listen to each other and interact with each other when performing.
Wonderful. So let's move on to this program that you've devised, Toward the Dawn, that we will be hearing in person next Friday, which is marvelous. It's in 3 sections. We conveniently have 3 singers from the group now. So maybe you could just take us through, in generics, the program. It's a journey through the nocturnal hours and the various influences, various reactions to that. And then after we've had a general overview, maybe we could talk a little bit more specifically about some of the pieces. So the first section is Evening.
Yes, so the general premise of the programme, and part of the reason we put it together actually, was, as Kathy mentioned in the introduction, is to go towards hope and to start in the darkness that we've all been in and to slowly emerge into the light. And it also is nice to follow the office of the hours that observed in monasteries back in the 16th century and ever since. So we start with the evening. By inviting the evening to come along, with a couple of madrigals by Wilby and Ward, and also a Compline hymn, a very simple setting by Tallis, and then a fantastic Vigilante by Bird. And we can go into more detail on those later if you like, but just as an overview. So the first set is all about the twilight and the light beginning to fade and the darkness coming.
And then we move on to Nightfall.
And in the Nightfall section, we've sort of concentrated on the anxiety and the restlessness that can occur when you're in the middle of the night. Some of it's a little bit about being in and out of sleep. Some of it is about sort of meditation. Some of it is about reflecting on your day or on your inner thoughts. And there's also magical of a lone lover yearning for his loved one, but finding himself alone in bed and not very happy with the scenario.
And then finally, Dawn.
Yeah, so the last section is where we finally get the glimmer of hope and the light. So we start with the Talis Onata Lux, which is beautifully simple, but also exquisitely simple. This is the light in the analogy of Jesus being the light of the world. And then we have this wonderful Monteverdi madrigal, which describes how the light sort of comes creeping over and how nature responds to dawn. And then we finish the piece with this huge, great big votive antiphon by Taverna, the Ave Dei Patris Filia, which is an epic work, and it sort of takes you through all the emotions, finishing with this splendid Amen, which you can't help but be positive about.
It's an amazing moment. Maybe we can actually just work backwards a little bit and talk about the Taverna. Interesting, lots of stories about his life, potentially a spy, lots of various spy things in this theme actually in the program. But certainly that glorious point of English polyphony with those incredible, that specific sonority of very high voices, three voices, that it goes from these three upper voices, three lower parts, and only at certain moments does the whole thing come through. Is there anything about that piece specifically that you enjoy interacting with each other in terms of just the sonorities and the way you make music?
I think it is partly, as you say, it's that sort of interplay between those reduced voice solo sections, and then suddenly you get this fantastic full voice chorus that comes in as a kind of response to that. The text is really amazing, actually. It's kind of, is almost obsequious in its praising of the Virgin Mary, and how wonderful, every analogy under the sun about how great she is, including comparing her to the sun, in fact. And then, like I say, the Amen is one of the high points of anything we ever sing. I think, especially at the end of a concert, when we get there, we get to that point. Yeah. Do you agree? I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. And even though it is an epic piece, as Emma says, because nobody has to sing all the way through it, and actually it doesn't feel exhausting to sing. And it's just, what is lovely about it is listening to, generally there are trios of solos that, we all enjoy listening to. In fact, our favourite one is always the one that features the three sisters. Sorry, Emma, singing a trio together. And I think it does happen to be the best bit of verse in the piece, actually, but they're smiling hugely by the end of it, and it's funny at the end as well, and it's just lovely to be able to appreciate each other's music making, and then to come together and with a big Amen at the end. It's great.
Yeah, I always wonder whether these composers were just trying to outdo each other in amens, because you have all these wonderful pieces that, even the shorter ones from a little bit later that take about 2.5 seconds, and then you have an amen that goes on and on and on in this gorgeous polyphony, melismatic and all that kind of stuff. It's terrific. Just sticking with Taverna, but as a more general question, how do you choose additions for these pieces? I mean, there's so much to talk about in terms of Victor, what's what, where the underlay is, that kind of stuff. Do you have a committee for that, or do you just appoint someone who's your sort of in-house musicologist to decide?
That's a really good question. I think in terms of the additions we use, we try and always go for the sort of the plainest in a way. So minimal Ficta in the addition, and then we work it out. We spend a long time in rehearsals discussing Ficta, / arguing about Ficta. There was a notable recording session for our Josquin disc where it almost descended into fisticuffs, but purely about Ficta. So we do argue about it, but yeah, we just try and work it out as we go along. But as you say, there are so many options, and we have to try things out and see what works for that context,
And Emma is the librarian, so she has the job of getting all the additions, and it's not always easy, is it?
Yeah. So yeah, we sometimes just get people to typeset it. We've got a brilliant guy who often typesets stuff for us, and he knows exactly what we want. We just want it clear, plain text in a size that you can read even in a dim church, so there's various things to think about.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we're so blessed nowadays with this plethora of editions online, but of course then it is quite difficult to hone in and decide, and often making your own is actually the easiest thing in some ways, especially if you've got someone who's great with typesetting, which I'm not. So it's a very mixed program in terms of, maybe we can stick with England and just talk about the great Tallis and Bird pairing, both musically and also commercially, in terms of the venture with the Canzone Sacre. And we have the great Vigilate of Bird. Maybe we could start off with that and maybe move on to then the two Tallises.
Yeah, well, the Vigilate is actually from the collection that his Canzone Sacre of 1589, which he published after Tallis had died. But obviously it all kicked off in 1575. Was it 1575?
Yeah.
Yes, it was, with their first one. So, and it's quite interesting how the different styles in the first half, where we have the Tale of Santa Terminum by Tallis, which was from the 1575 Canzone Sacre, in a very simple style, very sort of Elizabethan. Whereas, the Bird collection in 1589, some slightly more complex things going on in there. But the Vigilate on that subject, I think it's pretty much one of my favourite pieces, isn't it? And somehow the theme seems to slot in to so many different programmes that we put together. And obviously for this one, it's very appropriate, because it's talking about not falling asleep, staying awake. And it's very widely seen as an allegory of a warning to the Roman Catholic recusant community to keep an eye out for spies, and for Protestant spies who would, tell the authorities they were singing this music with connotations of, them being God's people. And in the same Canzone Sacre, there are texts about Jerusalem lying desolate, and pleas for God to be with his people. So there are lots of images of the Roman Catholic community to belong to. And Vigilate is fantastic. There's so much, it's very lively, there's so much incredible word painting. And there are examples of the galley cantu, the cock crowing, and there's this spiky rising figure, which is great fun. And then when he talks about going to sleep, it's very slow moving suspensions. And a clever device, and when we sing Omnibus Dico, I say to you, all the voices come in together. So it's a very clever piece. And yeah, we normally enjoy singing it. And I think in this programme, it sort of serves as a way of stopping people from having fallen asleep. The first three pieces we do are pretty soporific, aren't they? So then Vigilate comes along and wakes them up. So the Tallis that is included in that first little bit as well is a much simpler affair, and was published in the Canzone Sacre that Tallis and Bird did together. And they had
styles moved so much, because Tallis was obviously older, but I think Tallis was under 4 monarchs, and of course it was flip-flopping between Catholicism, Protestantism, back to Catholicism again. So they had to write in Latin and in English, in florid style, in a more restrained style. So they really trod the line. They both managed to keep their heads. Neither had their heads chopped off, but it's because they were favourites of Elizabeth mostly.
It is extraordinary. And Tallis is such a chameleon who could just blend in with whatever style and obviously excel at all of them. It's remarkable. And as you said, we are very grateful for the fact that neither of them did meet an untimely end, which of course many others did at that time. Maybe we can move a little bit across the water and talk about, I think we probably should address Allegri, as this is probably the most famous piece on your program. And with, shrouded in mystery, what started off as basically a very simple plain song, a chant with false bordens and faux bordens and things, has become this piece that is epic, and it goes through various iterations. Can one of you talk about that a little bit, and which version you're doing?
Well, I think what we're doing is the current received Western European version. But yes, there's a lot of sort of fable and legend around it that the piece was never properly written down, or at least the ornamentation was never written down, and it was solemnly passed on between members of the Sistine Chapel choir. And then Mozart heard it and he immediately came out of the chapel and transcribed it from his head. I mean, I don't think there's anything particularly to substantiate any of these claims. And you know, it's famous for the high C, this great ornamentation high C that keeps coming round. It's most likely that there were a load of different editions in different transpositions, and this is the one we've been left with performing because it's, you know, it's the most exciting and the most famous. But yes, a lot of people have asked us, a lot of our sort of regular supporters said, oh, when are you going to do the Allegri? And we thought actually this was the program to put it into. We are only 12 singers, so it doesn't quite work using all 12. So 2 of us sit out. So 10 of us take on the job of the 5-part choir, the 4-part choir, and then 1 solo plain chant singer. And it works well. It's a penitential psalm, Psalm 51, but we put it in the night section so that it plays sort of 2 roles. Firstly, as a meditation, as you say, it's a piece that alternates between polyphony and plain song, and it's 19 verses and there's a rhythm to it. Each section is exactly the same length, so it's a sort of it becomes a sort of mantra. And it was written originally for the service of Tenebrae, which was performed for the 3 days running up to Easter Sunday. And Tenebrae in Latin is darkness, and it was a very dramatic service where the candles would slowly get extinguished until the church was in total darkness. And then there would be what they call the strepitus, which is it was any kind of loud noise. It was usually banging of books and things like that to represent the earthquake that took place when the sky went dark as Christ breathed his last. So it seemed apt that this double-edged sort of night theme could come into the middle of our program. So it sort of sits right in the middle there. I don't actually have to sing it. But we're very lucky that we've got Helen Ashby, who is a sort of machine at smashing out the top C's. And if she goes crock, then her twin sister or Becky can do it. So we're well covered.
Oh, we all look forward to that very much. And you're right. I mean, you bring in a mantra, you bring in the meditation several times. And I think certainly after this period of this long hiatus where people have been doing a certain amount of self-exploration and internal exploration, but this music has a kind of, it's always had that quality, obviously, but maybe it is even more appealing now in terms of the headspace, if I can use that word, that it gets people into. So delighted for that. And then also, what about John Ward? This is a name we don't know particularly well. Can someone talk about him?
Yeah, he's quite an interesting character, actually, because we're singing a madrigal by Don Wilby as well, and probably everybody knows, and he's much more well-known madrigalist. But John Ward, I did a little bit of research on him today. He was a chorister at Canterbury Cathedral as a boy, and then he was employed as a musician by a chap called Sir Henry Fanshawe, who had 3 properties in London and 2 in the country. And I think Ward had to go around with him wherever he was to be his musician in residence. And he also used to composed music for viol because his employer was a very keen viol player. But obviously he wrote church music, but he also wrote madrigals. He published some of them. I'm trying to think when this one was published. I didn't make a note of that. But anyway, it's absolutely gorgeous, this Come Sable Night that we're singing.
1613 in his first book.
Oh, thank you. I knew he'd know. But yes, it's a really lovely madrigal, and there's a lot of sort of interesting styles in it. It's sort of in contrast to the Wilby, which is just sort of all melancholy all throughout. The Ward has got some interesting points, and at one point we're exhorted to help Amintus, a lovelorn shepherd, to condole, and it's this gorgeous phrases going down that are copied round and round the group, and then it kind of builds up into this frenzy of grief. And I think at the end, I don't know if you guys agree with me, it seems to me that he dies of unrequited love. That seems to happen anyway. He fades away and dies, and it's just got this beautiful ending. It's a fabulous book. People don't know so much about him, so we're happy to introduce this madrigal to Boston Early Music Festival. It may be before, of course. But.
Thank you very much. And just in terms of the program as a whole, I mean, it has domestic music making, it has madrigals, it has, you know, church music, and from a wide variety of places, of forces, I think. I mean, in terms of stuff that was written for all males, some castrati. How does your sound change in terms of the pieces that you're doing? I mean, we can be specific about pronunciation of Latin if that changes, or even in terms of just the sonority of the group when you're doing something that was, for example, thought of as a small domestic madrigal versus something in one of these great chapels, either pre-Reformation or post.
I think that is something we think about, certainly, and certainly with, I think, even different composers, but certainly madrigals, the madrigals in this program are perhaps a slight exception because of the nature of them. But, you know, you do have to lighten your touch to an extent. And I think we often find with bird, generally, like all bird, whether big stuff or small stuff, actually we have to change our sound a bit for the sonorities to kind of ring true. And to kind of take the fuss out of it, because it's such amazing writing, but, you know, so you have to let the music do the work. And some other pieces, we feel like we have to impose a little bit more of ourselves on it. And, you know, certainly something like the Taverna has to be quite fat, you know, quite broad for it to really ring out.
I think a lot of it often depends on the range as well. I mean, if we go into 6 voice part writing, often the sopranos can be, you know, 2.5 octaves above the basses. Because we're only 12 singers, there's only a certain spread we can get, and there might only be 2 basses on the bottom part. So we find often the comment is basses sing up, sopranos sing down a bit, and we just try and get the balance right. But of course, it's also depends on the acoustic of the building as well. Some are bass heavy, some are treble heavy. And then altos and tenors in the middle sometimes just have to fight it out between themselves.
And you've sung in, as Kathy mentioned, the beautiful acoustic of St. Paul's Church in Harvard Square many times. Does that, in terms of when you get to a certain venue and you have a presumably brief rehearsal or however sound check, do you have to, I mean, you know the venue you're going to, is that usual? Do you kind of vet the venues beforehand, or are you on your toes when you get there thinking how it sounds now? And of course, when it's filled, I don't know how filled St. Paul is in terms of the restrictions, but, you know, when it's filled, whether the acoustic changes, how on your toes you are in terms of that during even the performance.
I mean, I can guarantee you one thing, that we will be doing some different tempi in St. Paul's on Friday night to the following night in New York in the Miller Theatre, which we are assured is a completely dead acoustic. But in answer, we would never turn the venue down. We learned to adapt. But yes, usually we start a rehearsal on the day with a fairly well-known piece that we can run in its entirety. And then we'll each go out and have several of us will go out and have a listen and feed back to the group. Well, it's this kind of acoustic. It's funny, it changes when you're halfway down the nave, or, oh, it's very true. Or we might even move. We might set ourselves in a certain area and then move to adapt to the venue to compensate for that.
We had a concert on Tuesday night this week in London, and the acoustic one of the things you mentioned was whether it changes. You know, it did change significantly between the rehearsal and the concert once there were bodies inside. So that is sometimes a challenge. I mean, luckily the acoustic there was glorious anyway, so it was almost even easier with bodies. But we have had ones where we think it's great in the rehearsal, and then we get in the concert and it's like, oh, hang on a minute, it's completely dead, and then we have to adapt on the hoof, you know, and change our style as we go. But yeah, you're right, you do have to be on your toes.
Yeah, and it changes even in the winter, for example, because you've got everybody wearing their big coats, and that is amazing how just, you know, 300 people wearing coats can actually make a difference to acoustic. So I mean, so obviously, and it can get quite cold in Boston, can't it? So
sometimes. Is there anything else about the program we should discuss? I mean, I'm thinking maybe Monteverdi, a name that is rather familiar to many of our listeners.
Yeah, we don't often, actually, this is rather late for us, really,
Yes.
Monteverdi was pushing well into the Baroque now, but yeah, we don't often do much. We did, many years ago, we did his Stile Antico Mass of 1610, I think it is, which kind of worked well for us because it's written in the Stile Antico, the old style. So this is sort of a bit of a departure, this Monteverdi here. It's very much a madrigal. It's really, really pictorial, the way it starts with just one single voice, just on just two notes on the whole phrase, and it's quiet, and then voices creep in, and we're talking about the sort of trembling foliage and the waves murmuring, and it just sort of builds up. So it's perfect where it is in this dawn section of the program. It really is sort of the chinks of sunlight coming over the horizon, and then it expands into the full sunrise as we go through the piece. It's absolutely a glorious piece.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to do something a little bit later as well, a little bit more baroque.
Yeah, and going back to your earlier comment actually about how we change our style, this is one particular madrigal where really you have to do it one voice to a part. So that's how we do this particular one. I can't imagine us all piling in singing it, and it actually gives a very nice contrast to the Taverna that follows.
Wonderful. So what else is on the musical agenda? Oh, I'm sorry, James, yeah.
I was just going to comment on another piece in the program, because people might wonder, it is Laboravi and Gemitu, and it's down as being by Rogier stroke Morley. It's anyone that knows Thomas Morley's work will realise it's demonstrably not Morley, because it's in a totally different style, very much in Rogier's style. Rogier was a Flemish composer working at the Spanish court for Philip II. It seems that Morley heard it, transcribed it, and put his name at the top. I don't know whether he was trying to pull a fast one or whether he wanted to show off his beautiful transcription skills or whatever. I mean, Morley was certainly a serial entrepreneur. His great book of madrigals, The Triumphs of Oriana, all in praise of Elizabeth I, earned him quite a small fortune. They're quite sycophantic. I mean, obviously, all the madrigals are not by him, but quite a lot of them are by him. And, it was a domestic music-making book that was in all the noblemen's households. So maybe, I don't know. I don't know why Morley put his name at the top of it, but we seem to persist by calling it Rogier stroke Morley, but it's definitely Rogier.
Thank you. That's a great clarification. I was just going to ask, what else is on the musical agenda upcoming? I think there are some big anniversaries, right?
Yeah, we're in preparations now for the Big Bird anniversary next year, 2023, 500 years since his death. So we are recording a CD later this year for release in the anniversary year, and planning all sorts of bird activities. He is very much our top composer, I think, as a group. So it's quite an exciting time for us, I think.
Must be quite hard, again, with your kind of collective approach to decide on one disc's worth of bird. It's like sort of choosing between children which ones you do, because there's so much great stuff. There's so many different styles as well. But that's very exciting.
We have recorded quite a bit of bird already, and obviously serve lots of other groups. So it's nice to try and find things that are not recorded so often, but also to include the usual gems in there as well.
There is a subcommittee who put these programs together, and they spent a lot of time putting a program together. And then we realized that another UK group very similar to us had done that, more or less that very same program on disc last year. So it was back to the drawing board.
Yes.
Well, we are the lucky ones to get the whole panoply there, which is great. Is there anything else we want to talk about the program? I think we covered it in fairly good detail, actually.
Yeah, we're just really looking forward to heading over.
It's
I realised today it's the week till we fly out. I was like, very exciting.
And our viewers and the wider community are so excited about welcoming you back here in person. It's going to be a terrific evening. And then following the evening, a terrific webcast as well. As Kathy mentioned, it's sold out. But many of you will be at St. Paul Church a week from tomorrow for what will be an absolutely glorious evening from Stile Antico. And I want to close just by thanking the three of you very much for taking your time to talk to us. It's been a great conversation, and can't wait for next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. Thanks.